Right, we're here for another episode of Reflections, and even though you don't see us for this particular episode, you will hear us. And quite frankly, you know what people say more important than how they look sometimes. So I co-host for this one is going to be Ashley Kang, Esports Journalist of the Year award nominee, back-to-back, second year running. Was it the second year?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, there we go. I know you get excited about that, so I thought, in the same way as, Oscar nominated is what they always write on the posters to big people up. So our our guest for this episode is going to be Nuddle. If anyone remembers, I had him on an episode of a show I did with Emily Rand 2 years ago in 2018. Now, I will just say, first of all, he is French, but he actually works as a coach for Flamengo, which is one of the CB LOL teams in Brazil, which is not unusual, actually. Like, I've known many, many people where they start off as, like, they're on Twitter and they know a lot about League, then they're an analyst for a team, and then if you want to become a coach, you try and prove yourself in a smaller region. And I think probably the best example for me of somebody who did this is Peter Dunn, who's obviously like the mastermind, the Professor X over at Mad Lions there, because obviously he spent his time in a bunch of regions, including CB LOL. So here's the first question I have for you is, how do you actually coach the team if you're not in Brazil right now? Presumably you're in Europe, right?
Actually, I am in Brazil right now. That is the crazy part, because
have you just been there the whole time?
I was working for a team the year before until some point this year. And then this entire crisis happened.
Sure.
And I knew I could have flown back to Canada, but I knew it would be very hard to get a job for the rest of the year. And I like working. That's why it's like I'm in esports. I'm a passionate. I like working. I like teaching. I like watching League of Legends. So if I wanted to have that chance to work, I decided to stay in Brazil during this crisis. And in the middle of the split, I got a call from Flamengo, who was doing pretty poorly at the time. And then I just started working. And that's why I made it a gamble, in a sense, to stay in here. And in the end, I got a contract. It was a nice little gig. It was a sprint of 1 month trying to make playoff, which we didn't make, unfortunately, one game away. But that is the beauty of esports, I guess.
And actually, I'll just relay, because when I was alluding to the show that I did with Emily Rand, right, there's actually a famous premise in CSGO where I've done all those events where I'm like the desk analyst, which is that even if my analysis is good, because predictions are totally different from analysis, it's sort of like what your heart tells you or what your gut tells you, It's not that I'm like the worst at predictions, but sometimes I have streaks where I just get like everything wrong. And this is probably one of my most insane, because it was early 2018, I made the show I'm referring to, because it was going to be about LCK exclusively. Just to try and get edgy, I actually named the show, if you remember, League's Next World Champion, because the joke was like Korea's going to win every year, and they've never won since then. So that show actually basically invalidated its own name. So it doesn't always work out. That's the problem, kids. You've got to take a chance, but it doesn't always work out. Right, I want to start here, actually, Ashley. What is the situation? Because I know, like, during playoffs, they had to go back to, like, online play and stuff. Was the regional all online as well?
Yeah, so in the LCK, the playoffs as well as the regional was quite tight. So there are only 4 matches in playoffs, which might be shocking to hear to people in LEC and LCS. Korea still has the King of the Hill / Gauntlet style. The first 3 matches are played in a single week, and the weekend after that, that's the finals. And 2 days after that, we have 3 days of regional finals, like literally games back to back, and all of them were conducted online because the coronavirus situation got slightly worse in Korea. We are still hitting 100 to 200 infected cases per day. So just keeping up with the current pandemic situation that is also impacting Korea.
Right, Nuddle, since we haven't talked to you for ages, mate, let's get a sense for where you were at. So coming into this final is DAMWON and DRX, which, let's face it, for the whole split, they were the 2 main teams. I mean, DRX were the only 2 teams who beat DAMWON. Like, everyone wanted to see this matchup. It's also, like, contrasting styles. Like, because of how dominant DAMWON were, did you actually give DRX a chance to win this match?
I don't think so. Like, going into the series, you look at DAMWON Gaming, who, if you look statistically, they're first in every possession and everything. Yeah. But it's not about being first. It's about how there was like you said, there's different style, but there's also a clash because I spoke about that 2 years ago in that podcast. It's all about mid lane for me, where the entire game starts. And DRX, they have Chovy, but their ability to control mid lane and to control proximity river to mid was not as good as the one of DAMWON Gaming. So even though DRX in this series showed off like with some amazing jungling by Pyosik,
Sure.
like they still couldn't break the wall that is DAMWON Gaming. And then you go into this series and you already know that you're going to have to waste 2 or 3 bans directly to Showmaker. And then as good as Showmaker is, that means Nuguri is going to get whatever he wants into the top lane. And then you go into a situation where a player that is ahead in CS at 15, 75% of the time, is always up in CS, is 1,000 gold up at 15, has more than half a level every game at 15 minutes, is going to have an insane impact on the game. And one of your best tools to deny those players are to directly ban them. So you go into this series, and for me, DRX was just strategically behind in terms of drafting.
Yeah.
And then you can see from the bot side of the map, which sure bot side has a huge impact, but Ghost just accepted his role. And for me, when I looked at this team, we can call them predictable in a sense, but then in the first game, they just pulled up the Caitlyn. And then I watched their post-game interviews, which was something very interesting because they were not a team that would be able to play much around bot lane. And first game, they just pull up the Ornn, which got banned into the next game, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
And then in the post-game interview, you see Zephyr saying that they usually play around the upper lanes, but Caitlyn became an OP pick. So back then, they weren't able to play it, but then they just practice in preparation for Worlds and playoff, because that's what the best teams do. They have to be able to diversify. They have to be able to get a draft advantage. And in game 1, you see DRX telling them, all right, can you play Caitlyn? The answer was yes, and it was definitely a yes, because this Caitlyn just entirely snowballed this map. And then after this game, you're like, how do you beat this team? And for a Korean team, I think the game 1 was just a huge reality check of how this series was going to go.
Yeah, if anyone, by the way, is like a fan of, like, obviously LCS plays it a lot. If anyone's thinking, like, well, what's weird about playing Ornn? Like, Nuguri is not an Ornn player. I mean, in Korean top laners, the really good ones, play a million champions, many of them carries. So, yeah, that was quite an unusual pick, which obviously signified we're not playing through top lane for this game.
Yeah, like, I think it was very admirable what DAMWON Gaming did, because not only did Jeffa, the head coach of DAMWON Gaming, mention that they practiced Caitlyn, they specifically predicted that DRX is not going to ban Caitlyn, because during the reg, and Canyon, the jungler, also said it in the interview that he did with me after the finals. But so because DAMWON Gaming, even though they were extremely dominant throughout the entire regular split, as you mentioned, like they put Nuguri often on the carry picks, such as Jace and Camille. They always put Showmaker on a strong lane champion, such as, Zoe, or even Azir, or even Syndra, and Canyon is going around activating them while the bot lane is absorbing pressure. So DRX predicted that they're going to leave Caitlyn open and try to get some other very strong picks on mid or top lane. But DAMWON Gaming actually read into that. So Nuguri went on the interview to say, I've been practicing nothing but Ornn outside the scrims in my individual games the entire time, and it worked. And not only did that demoralize DRX, it was almost sending a message to all the world's team that are going to face DAMWON Gaming at that stage, because, hey, do you guys think that we're predictable, only playing through our top side? Hey, our bot lane can carry just as well. So I think teams around the world will have to worry about a lot of things if they get drafted in the same group as DAMWON.
Sure. I mean, obviously, like Nuddle, one of the key things was if you were to come in and you were trying to explain to a casual fan how the matchup should go, one thing you would say is, in theory, you'd think that DAMWON would want to attack the top side. Like, Doran's a player who is he's a decent LCK player, but the elite top laners tend to get the better of him. Meanwhile, in theory, at the beginning of the split, the bot lane of DRX is supposed to be one of the main strengths, right? It's left legendary player in depth, and then Kerry is considered like the breakout player of the year. So what did you think about that?
Well, I think that as good as a bot lane that you can have in this meta if you can accelerate the game through top the way they've done, the way that DAMWON Gaming did in the other games, then it becomes very hard because you just look at their picks and you look at the way the game is evolving. It relies around very specific points right now. You have the first Drake, which is going to be one of the main point of contention because if you can get it, you already start putting the other team on a clock, or if you can get it while you're not supposed to, you're slowing down the game. And then you look at DAMWON Gaming, they're not one of the team that had the highest priority on Drakes. But they were one of the team that had the highest, by far, Rift Herald prio. And then you put their picks onto a Renekton. What's an ADC going to do if a Renekton gets a first brick, first blood, and a 20 CS lead every single game at 15 minutes? So directly from a strategic advantage, you're cutting down some of the advantage that DRX will have. And then when you talk about the bot lane difference, like I feel like if you watch those players and you watch the meta in the bot lane, it is very stale, in my opinion. It is a meta into which it is very hard directly from the ADC role to have a strong impact. It mostly comes down to how your support and jungle are going to be playing together to actually enable your map. So you reach a point into the mid game where you go to the third Drake, for example, at 15, 16 minutes, and ADC is going to do nothing almost versus those picks. And you could see it. Even the game he played Ornn, he just couldn't do anything on his Gen, I think they picked in game one. But let's not get too far ahead with the Gen, because I think the Spike pick was completely taking everyone off guard for a reason. Yeah, it was... for me, they literally just lost the draft and lost the game at the moment they picked this champion. And they had every cards in front of them. And that's why it's like, when it comes down to bot lane, Caitlyn, sure, has a huge edge on almost every matchup. And then you have Ashe. But from a strategic standpoint, once again, DAMWON Gaming just said, you're not going to get Ashe this series. If you don't get Ashe, you're not going to be able to control Canyon because you lose the ability to use Hawkshot. And if you can't control Canyon too well, then he's going to be able to accelerate the game, which is what he did in game 3, but couldn't do it in game 1 and 2. Because once again, like I said, Puyallup just jungle wonderfully. But in terms of expectation, you can have an amazing bot lane, but your role from your ADC becomes very limited in terms of the meta. It's mostly about how you're going to control and how you're going to use your mechanics in small skirmishes. But the edge, whether we agree or not, is very small between the top players, which is why in most region it was either 5 games or just clear 3-0. Because then there was like a huge strategic event. And then you look like, for example, Europe was clean 3-0 sweep in the final, but everything else was a 5 game. You look at China, it was 5 games in the grand final between Top Esport and JDG, which came down to very small edges. And almost everywhere you can see that the edge between people in terms of like raw strategy and raw game knowledge is closing, but then it will come down to very small individual actions and how you're going to be able to play into a setup and break a setup. And for me, that was, once again, DAMWON's gaming strength. DRX couldn't do anything against them past 12 minutes. They were completely controlled, and it felt like DAMWON Gaming was telling them, you're going to fight here, but we're going to have a better comp than you at fighting you in this exact spot. And then they would just win the game from there.
Ashley, what did you think of the Nidalee play of Canyon? And has anyone mentioned any of the Korean junglers? What do they like about Nidalee so much? Because like obviously we don't see it very much in some of the Western regions.
It's quite interesting because this is a bit different because I asked this question in the middle of the summer split and the meta has changed a bit since then. But in the middle of the summer split, I actually asked G2 Yankos, hey, what do you think about Nidalee? And why do you think that the European junglers aren't playing this as much? And he was talking about a lot of things, such as, Nidalee simply being a popular pick in Korean solo queue, because in Korean solo queue, it's less about the streamers or perhaps one-trick ponies players like trying to climb up the ladder. Like when you get to the challenger queue, it's all about the skill. The games get very bloody, and junglers like to play champions like Nidalee or even Silas or at least jungle in the solo queue a lot. And many of them are Chinese players because Chinese players also play the Korean solo queue a lot.
Sure.
And then, I guess another thing is Korea was taking a lot of inspiration from the LPL meta this split. And LPL was also playing a lot of the
AP. Loving Nidalee, yeah.
Yeah. Nidalee, perhaps Grace, perhaps even Kindred,
Yes.
and a lot of Evelyn, where you give the jungler a lot of resource. So the jungler actually acts like another laner. He has the resources, he has the carry power. And I think that's how they have been playing Canyon. I think that's how they've been playing Kanavi over at the LPL. And that's what they even try to do with Pyrsik with his Lily pick. I think it's just like a different interpretation on what a jungler should be. Because if you ask the Korean analysts, they'll usually say, yeah, this is like more of a jungle carry meta. And also the popularity of Nidalee, etc. picks in the Korean solo queue.
What about you, Nuddle? Because as I say, obviously in the West, like actually Spicker playing it in LCS playoffs was like a notable exception. But aside from that, we almost never saw it. Meanwhile, when I've been watching LPL and Peanut, or if I watch any of the Korean junglers, like when they go in Italy, they carry the game. So what do you think the difference of how they use the pick is?
I mean, one of the biggest difference is the laning phase from the specific region. Let's talk about LPL and LCK. For me, his way stronger at the core. And then you have a little bit more of like a pick diversity. And then when you look at the teams that played Nidalee specifically in the playoffs and regionals, you have Canyon and you have Gen.G, who are two of the teams who have the ability to play Renekton and Set very easily. And then the problem with Nidalee, it's like she's a good champion, but you can't just tell European mid laners, hey, you're going to play Nidalee or Rihanna this game. Like, what is Nidalee or Rihanna going to do to actually enable you to play towards mid? Like, you need to be able to specifically set the pick into success, and you need to be able to accelerate the game, which is why I think LPL and LCK has an edge on a lot of people. And Europe is catching up to the meta, still not with the Nidalee, but you could see the Ekarim everywhere. You could see some Evelyn being played left and right, which is how TSM approached. Like, they were the only team, I think, in NA who I saw play carry champions after the first round that they lost into the playoff and went straight to the loser, and they just played carry champion and they just started destroying everyone. And it's like, it's an adaptation for other regions, but as Ashley mentioned, like, you're talking about Korea, who has been known for their Nidalee. And one of the fun facts about Worlds this year, if I am not wrong, I don't think there is a single Chinese jungler going to Worlds this year.
No,
and for me,
they're all Korean, and then Vietnamese.
They're all Korean, Vietnamese, Taiwanese.
Yeah.
Wait, okay, fun fact. Mid Lion Shadow is Chinese.
True, and that is the only jungler that going to Worlds this year for that region. But then you look at how, for me, the jungle role is all about how you're going to be able to play with your team, play with the map. And historically, I highly believe that Koreans have been the best region at playing around jungling. And by importing Korean jungler to China, you're getting a reality into which, for me, you have stronger laner in a region that are taught, in a sense, by junglers who have been taught how to play together, and an ideology onto which you can have stronger jungler enabling a super strong accelerating picks inside the jungle. And then you look at LCK and LPL, and then you get the Nidalee for this reason.
All right. Yeah, that's good knowledge. Right, when you said earlier about how you initially start out when you're in a series like this and you look at the mid lane, I thought this was actually a very interesting detail, because in the series, obviously that was the big hyped marquee matchup, Chovy versus Showmaker, sort of the two consensus best mids, I notice, among like the analysts that I follow at least. So everyone was hoping it was going to be like a clash of the titans, you know, let's see who's the better mid laner. But I don't actually feel like this series showed us that Nuddle. Like, I thought Chovy played fine. He actually played well in some of the games. But as you kind of alluded to, it didn't really do anything toward, like, they couldn't make anything of it. Like, even if he was getting kills, if he was getting CS, like, he couldn't really do anything with that though, right?
I mean, for me, it's the fact that League of Legends has evolved so much through the years that now you may have the best mid laners. And I think this is like why having such a good mid laner is important. You look over in Europe, Caps for me is leagues over everyone.
Sure.
And even though he was playing against Fnatic, who have Illisang, who is a very specific player at controlling mid lane, it didn't even matter because Caps was able to abuse the right windows. And then if you look at Showmaker versus Chovy, I give the edge on Chovy in a pure 1v1 skill matchup. You could see he was ahead in most of the game in terms of CS. He was able to maintain pressure, but that pressure doesn't matter if on the other sides, you're just going to be able to get a lead. And then you see Nuguri, one of the game on Renekton. It was the game where Chovy started 2-0. I forgot if it was against Gen.G, but there was a game where literally Chovy starts 2-0. And the next thing you know, he's getting crashed on by a Renekton mid. He's getting crashed on by the support. They had very strong control on the bot side of the river, which means even if you have an advantage, what is he going to do with his advantage based on some picks that he gets if he can't leave lane? And in the end, that's what Showmaker could do in a lot of the scenarios. He managed to lock Chovy in lane, or we could say Chovy locked Showmaker in lane, but that's pretty much what he wanted. Because meanwhile, on the map, you could see Nuguri just accelerating and exploding the game. And in every game, that's pretty much what happened. Chovy was a bit ahead, and then you looked game 1, the Caitlyn, a monster. Game 2, Nuguri completely destroyed the game. Game 3, well, everything just exploded when Showmaker got a quadra kill at the Dragon. And then you look at every game, it was just close until the game just blew up. And that's what makes DAMWON Gaming, for me, a team that was, I will say it, like too good for Korea. And it's going to be interesting to see how this will pan out versus Chinese team, which is what I like about Worlds. Like, you just see clash of styles,
yes,
and you see high mechanical teams. But if you look at China in the last 2 years, the way FPX destroyed G2 in the grand final, they just split the map every game through bot side. They said your mid lane is never going to be able to leave because my support is going to be shadow on every single wave by pushing in one. And then the caps factor was completely negated. And that's what's going to be interesting, how China versus LCK, which LCK for me has evolved. They do look for a bit more fights, a bit more skirmishes, and a bit more contest. But then you're going to be facing a region that is famous for that. And that's what I can't wait to see about DAMWON Gaming versus the other teams. And I'm not even I'm saying DAMWON Gaming versus the other teams, but I do think DRX has the tools to clash, and I think Gen.G just likes fighting. So either they're just going to go big or go home, and they're going to give us a show, I think, no matter what. And that's how I tend to approach Worlds.
What do you think, Ashley? How do you expect DAMWON to match up against the best of the LPL and the other regions?
Going back to the whole DAMWON Gaming versus DRX finals, and Chovy versus Showmaker, I believe Chovy is an exceptional player. He is so smart on when to push the lane, when to not push the lane. Like, even when he's like having those super outplay moments, such as his 4-man taunt on Galio, when you ask him about that moment, it wasn't like an instinct-based decision like some players go through. It was a very, very calculated move. And I just think Chovy is extremely smart. It's just that DAMWON Gaming had better laners and better players, and unfortunately, and it hurts me to say this, it was a bot lane difference. Like, earlier we talked about how Depth is one of the best AD carriers in the world, which I agree with. Carrier was the breakthrough rookie of the which I also agree with. But coming into the playoffs, and naturally players like forms fluctuate. Sometimes they go up, sometimes go down.
Sure.
And Depth and Carrier both weren't in their greatest form. I'm not sure why. Maybe there could be a lot of different reasons. And Carrier said in the interview, hey, I'm not really confident with those like skill shots or my personal form anymore. But that kind of insecurity showed, because when I was watching that finals, I saw several moments where DRX could have gained control of the bot lane and snowballed from there. However, there were some misplays that did not allow the team to snowball. And when it's like two top tier teams clashing, those kind of small difference in lane control impacts the entire map. So it's kind of unfortunate that while DAMWON Gaming, like, they even pulled out Lux support, even though Barrow is a support that likes to play tank champions such as Maokai, Wukong. I wouldn't be surprised if he pulls out like a science support out someday, but like those look super solid, and Barrow could play AP mage supports just as easily, and DRX bot lane unfortunately was a level below. So going back to the whole Worlds, I am tentatively excited for DAMWON Gaming. The only thing, when someone asks me, hey, what are your expectations on DAMWON Gaming at Worlds? I would have probably answered before that finals. Okay, I'm really excited for this team, and I think they got their stage fright and their teamwork sorted out. The only thing is, they always just like go for those really crude snowballs, just like dominating every lane, especially in the top slide, and completely suffocating the other team. but they are exploring new playstyles now, which was evident in the finals game 1. So I have more expectation on DAMWON now. I don't know about Test versus DAMWON, but yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
When you say that, like, you sound very cagey now. You're like, I tentatively, you know, like, on Twitter it sounded like you, like, I think, here's the thing, I'm going to speculate now. Tell me if I'm right or wrong. I feel like DAMWON being so consistently good the whole split, so dominant, and then crushing this final, I think you think they're going to win Worlds.
No.
Why not then? What more do they have to do?
What do they have to do? I can't tell you 100% that DAMWON Gaming will win Worlds, and I mentioned this in our earlier episode, but my Twitter personality and my actual personality is quite different. And in the Twitter, I tend to, you know, pick up that mantle of I'm a super LCK fangirl because people like to consume the personality, so whatever. Weirdly, it's the external factors. I think DAMWON Gaming has the potential, but I've seen in 2019 Worlds where DAMWON Gaming got the nerves, like, to be the best of them. And after the G2 series, which G2 defeated DAMWON Gaming on 3-1, multiple G2 players have said, hey, this wasn't the DAMWON Gaming players that we recognize from scrims.
Sure.
Even when they look very dominant in scrims. And I'm just worried that now that we are going back to a stage once more, and in finals we might even have audience. I'm not sure about that, but I think it has been alluded that they're considering it in multiple places. And in order to win the Worlds, they have to go to the finals. And what if there is crowd in Worlds, you know? So it's like a really arbitrary thing, but it's also a factor that has grabbed DAMWON Gaming by ankle so many times. Their inability to show their 100% on stage. So that's why I'm worried about the most.
And that's a very interesting. Oh, sorry. I was going to say that's a very interesting point, because this coronavirus situation created a completely different atmosphere for teams. So you look at DAMWON Gaming, who, as she so well pointed out, was not a team that could always perform on stage. And then their performance even showed that in the past, like in regular season and World Championship. And then you look, you have the other side of the medal, where you have Fnatic in Europe, who for the playoffs moved into a format where they were actually going to the Riot Studio to change the comfort zone that they were playing in. They would rather try to create a situation that's more close to the stage to be less comfortable, which actually can create a completely different environment inside your head. And then you have DAMWON Gaming, who, if you make a team, in a sense, play in a situation where there's no stress, the games can become closer to, I would say, scrim, in a sense. And then the gap between their performance is lowered. And as a coach, and in esports, for any player, any team, your goal should always be this. You need and you want to reach a point where your stage performance are going to be closer every day to your scrim performance, which means that the amount of randomness that you're going to get into your practice is going to get lowered. And I feel like DAMWON Gaming this year really reached a point like this. Obviously, I never joined the tournament realm to just check one of their scrim without them knowing, but you can already tell that they were a very comfortable team in many aspects. They looked comfortable in their video. I like watching some of their stream, the RX on Twitch. And you can see how the environment was for them. And sure, it's always easy to have a good environment when you're winning. And sometimes you're just on that honeymoon and you just never stop. And I hope for them that it keeps going, because I want them to show off at Worlds that China is not like alone, let's say. And I want them to be, exactly, and be able to challenge. Because I think they have the tools to challenge. And like she pointed out once again, the way they approached different strategy and the way their bot lane stepped up when you put them into a carry role was very important. And I think that's an important element to bring up, because playoffs were played on 10-16. And we're going to go on 10-19 on Worlds. So to prepare for this, I literally read 3 patches to figure out what were changed. And then you have Caitlyn nerfs, you have Twisted Fate nerf, you have Ashe nerfs, you have Vayne buffs, and you're all over the place with champions that were not entirely into the meta this split. And this is once again one of the beauty of World, because teams show off an entire year and then they're kind of throwing a curveball. They're not completely destroying the meta, but they're going to tell teams, if you're going to win, you're going to have to show us your adaptability. And DAMWON Gaming took that direction, preparing for the final. And I think this will make things very interesting.
Sure. What about DRX then? How should we expect DRX to match up against some of the better teams in the world? I mean, one thing I enjoyed about them in LCK was they felt closer to an LPL team at times. With how crazy some of the drafts were, how much they like to try and just snowball a fight early. So I'm very interested to see how that will work out. What do you think, Ashley?
For me, DRX didn't feel that much like an LPL team. Like in terms of pure playstyle, I'll say that DAMWON Gaming is closest to LPL, but DRX kind of felt like themselves. The closest like comparison I'll draw is maybe G2, like the way they try to innovate the draft and like play what works for them and not what is necessarily conforming to the meta. For example, I remember like the support player for DRX Carrier play the most amount of champions as a single player out of all the LCK. Like he even played a Kel support once and made it work. So DRX is known to pull out the crazy picks and try to surprise the other players, which I don't know how it's going to work into like a Worlds meta. Like if they manage to like uncover a lot of secret picks and use them on stage to surprise people, maybe they might give them edge. But DRX, I really like DRX. I love the players there, but they felt so volatile throughout the entire season. Like, you know, in the summer split, like in the spring split, they were like defeating every single team, including DAMWON Gaming, and randomly dropped a game against a series against KT Roster, where Tusim was sick and they were pulling in SMAP support last minute. Even in the summer split, it looked like their performance was going up and down. And it didn't necessarily felt like it was to do with the mechanical ceiling cap of the individual players, but players have come on interviews to say, hey, like, you know, maybe there is something wrong with our shot calling hierarchy. Sometimes we don't shot call at all or shot call too much. So there is some synergy stuff to be worked on within DRX. And that's kind of understandable given that the leader of the team is Deft, the only veteran player there. And there are other players there such as Chobi and Kyria who haven't had like more than 2 years experience in playing League of Legends, but can also be quite vocal. So I can see this team actually drop out of groups. I can see this team making all the way to finals. I think DRX is the most difficult team to predict on simply because of their willingness to play so many different picks and their volatility throughout the entire year.
Come on, Nuddle.
To add to what she said, like what really impressed me by DRX is they have very, I would say, advanced strategy. They have very advanced game plan on how they're going to execute. Like the way they executed this Lilia in game 2 was impressive. Just take rates, level 2 gank mid, completely dominate top side. They protected bot side by hard pushing, and then it completely snowballed the game, and they should have won from there. But then you have the other DRX, who's for me is their wrong side of the medal in a sense, where you look at first game versus Gen.G, they're in complete control of the game. Their jungler is ahead, their bot lane is ahead, their jungler starts Dragon, while Chovi's playing Lucian mid and completely controlling. But you see a DRX who, instead of just focusing on what they can get, they did an all-in bot lane, they completely locked mid, which is his job, while doing Dragon. And then once you start facing better team, you instantly get punished. So instead of leaving that entire situation with an accelerating Dragon Soul threat, they ended up dying on bot lane, giving 2 kills. But if they make this mistake versus DAMWON Gaming, the game is just over. If you make those mistakes versus top esports, it's very hard to come back from this. And I think as planned as DRX can be, sometimes, like she said, their volatility, their chaos they can ensue to the game just comes back to bite them. And this is like the X factor in a sense where if they can negate this and actually play to a very strong mechanical level, I think they are very good at where they're going to be on the map. And then it just comes down to how they're going to execute their action. And then this is one of the biggest hedge between best teams. Like you see, we're probably going to end up talking about them a little bit, but T1 in their playoffs,
Sure.
they went for like very mechanical players, which is how, don't get me wrong, I think DRX just out-strategized, but also completely out-mechanicked Gen.G into the semifinal best of 5 where they made a comeback. And then you look at the way T1 tried to formulate their team. They did a very similar in terms of player. They went for a stronger laner than Teddy in playing their rookie, which, forgive me in advance for his name, is Gumayushi. And then, sorry, I always fuck it up for some reason.
It's a long name. It's a very convoluted name.
And then they went for that, but you look back to that series, Faker was not destroying BDD the same way Chovy was completely destroying BDD, which he was, I think, a 50 or 60 CS lead onto the Echo Azir. And then Faker played that same matchup and was behind in farm. And then you look at edges between teams, and that is one of them. But I think T1 had a fine approach into beating them, but into beating Gen.G. But in the end, DRX could do those things just better because they have more experienced player, and the amount of mistakes they were making in the game were very diminished compared to how T1 played. And that's why, for me, if DRX can cut down on mistakes, I think they have the knowledge. I think they definitely have the mechanics to play with everyone. And this will make the game. That's why she said, like, they can literally make it to the grand final. Of course, it will depend who you face. Like, sometimes, like, if you put G2 against the Chinese team in quarterfinal, well, G2 is going to get 0-3'd, and then that's the end of their world route. So, considering this, a lot of that was going to come down to how they show up in group and which DRX shows up. If the DRX that has a confident bot lane shows up and then Chovy just like, yeah, I'm going to roll over Worlds this year, it's over.
Sure.
Well, they can easily make it to the final. And that's what I want to see from them once again. Like, I'm not like the LCK fanboy, but I am like a League of Legends fanboy. I want game quality. I want to see the best teams play at their best, which is what is so wonderful to see from an outside eye of a person who's worked with League of Legends for years.
Yeah, one thing actually that I found also quite interesting about DRX is obviously they do try some, as you were alluding to, some very unusual, unorthodox drafts. And that has basically been a hallmark of CV Max's career. Even when he was in Griffin, he would do some really weird drafts that almost seemed like the champions he picked wasn't how they were going to play the game out. And so the problem with that is it reminds me a little bit of Reaper in the LCS, where when you're trying to be a draft genius all the time and find some either like something someone couldn't expect, or you purposely try and create some weird advantage for yourself, it can be very hard to execute that. And one of the things I've found weird about him as a coach is both of these squads he's worked with have tons of rookies in them. They have people who maybe you've never even played a playoff series. And so that's why I allude to Reaper, because I've seen the same problem, in my opinion, with Reaper, which is he's taken teams that were good players, mechanical players, and instead of saying like, right, I'm just going to make it easy in the draft, I'm going to make it simple, here's the obvious win conditions, here's how we're going to play, it's like he brings this super complicated plan that can be hard to execute under pressure. Any thoughts?
I mean, as from a coach point of view, it's obviously, I'm going to use T1 as an example. Like, I have no idea what happened with their team. Like, we can only speculate from the outside, and this is not something I like doing. But when you move in rookies into a lineup, they have a lot less ego. They have a lot more openness to listening to coaching, orders. Like, if you put, sorry, one second, I have to check his name because I'm just going to ruin it again. Gumayushi, like, he's going to listen to Faker. Like, do you think this 18 years old player is not going to listen to him when he's telling you that you're going to push this and just stay here? And then when you talk about this type of coaching, it is easier to tell rookie you're going to play this. And of course, it is easier to play towards mechanic. And for me, that's the direction League of Legends taking. Like, I spoke about it a bit earlier. The amount of knowledge that is known by people is shared. And that is one of the main reason why, in my opinion, Korea could reign supreme for years. It is because they had such solid infrastructure and there were very little resources and time, because the game was young, for people to actually acquire that knowledge and just share it around. But nowadays, if you want to know about freezing a wave, you just go on YouTube, freezing wave League of Legends. But when it comes down to competitive League of Legends, I'm going to use Caps as an example. Whatever teams Caps plays in, they will have a way to play around him that becomes unique. When he played with Fnatic, he brought his knowledge that he had in Fnatic and the way Fnatic played around him to G2. And then G2 started playing around this. And then when you play with Rookie, and then you talk in terms of knowledge, if knowledge is getting known, and sure there is an edge, obviously, because otherwise everybody would be at the same level. But if there is a small edge between knowledge, and if you have time to work with people, which in my opinion, DAMWON Gaming, this is one of their advantage. They stuck to this lineup for a while. They just moved, not DRX, DAMWON Gaming, they just moved in Ghost as full-time ADC. And then they had a very strong balance between mechanics and game knowledge. And that's why China, in the last 2 or 3 years, for me, reigned supreme, because they just ensue chaos, and they have some amazing mechanics while the knowledge is being shared around. Like, people understand how you're supposed to freeze. But then it's going to come down to what you're going to do around this. And then Rookie can make this easier, but it takes time. You're not just going to have like 5 rookies and tell them, all right, you're going to attack this. And that's why it's like when T1 was playing 10 games in a row with the closer Kana, Teddy Effort, Cos lineup, I was like, this team can win LCK the split. And then they lost one series to the RX, bam, it was over. And sure, there's maybe like we say, internal stuff, the faker factor in playoffs that you have to consider. But I thought this iteration of T1 was an amazing team to watch, because they were creating windows that most of the LCK teams never wanted to create before. They were trusting in their mechanics to fight a vision defense in terms of Baron versus just waiting and trying to do the Baron for the other team to make a mistake. They were attacking. And League of Legends is becoming about attacking. It's becoming about breaking setup. It's becoming about how are you going to get an edge on the person? And mechanics will give you this, because you can be at the right place at the right time. But if you completely misexecute, you don't have the mechanic to back this up, you're just going to fall off short on the play. And that's what I like about League of Legends. I think it's going to keep evolving. I think we're going to see a way bigger focus on how not just pure mechanics, but the mechanics within an action, which if we talk about DAMWON Gaming, this is what they do best. I was watching them. Their team fighting is splendid. They move as ball formation if they're going to play a front to back. They have their flanks ready. They know when they're supposed to hold. Even Nuguri knew when to hold his Ornn, which impressed me, because I had never seen him play on like a champion like this before. And for me, this was their biggest edge. They moved in a way that you just couldn't attack them. And in the game one is literally the perfect example. The game one in the grand final, it felt like, sure, there was a Pyke kind of ruining this entire game, but the way they were playing was amazing to watch. And like, if teams are going to be able to start doing this, it will come down to the micro within an action. And then, of course, there's the individual micro, which we can use Caps, Knight, for example. But you look at Top Esports over in China, you look at G2 over in Europe, you look at TSM over in NA. For me, the teams with the best mids in every region either won or finished second. And then, sure, this defined the game, but they were also, for me, the teams who were most confident into using their mechanics. Because once again, like I said, knowledge is shared, is getting known, and there's going to be a parity, not a parity, because there's always players. Like, a player brings a specific knowledge to a team and can teach it. A coach can do the same. And this is why mechanics, I think, for me, they already reign supreme if you have reached a degree of knowledge that is sufficient for your mechanics to shine.
Since he touched earlier there, Ashley, on the fact that T1 did have these different compositions of players, I mean, by the end, obviously, for the Gauntlet, they were even trying Gumayushi, who barely played before. So what did you think of the T1 adventure in that sense? Like, obviously, people thought for playoffs, right, maybe Faker doesn't get played at all because they were looking better with closer. Then they came to this scenario where they replaced the AD carry. Obviously, the whole time they were kind of trying to mess around with jungle because Kaz had his issues. What did you think of, like, the different faces of T1, as it were?
Okay, I never worked for a team, so I don't know exactly how a team works. But from a purely spectator viewpoint, it's all about the playoffs. It's all about going to Worlds. That's how I see things. And when, as soon as Closer, when he turned 17, moved into the LCK, for me that meant one thing, that Coach Kim was prepared to use Closer all the way into the playoffs and in the finals, because, especially in the later half of the summer split, teamwork becomes so important. You're working on your team for, financing it for those best of 5 matches. And when I saw that Closer was becoming the main mid laner, and this is quite a public knowledge, so I'm quite happy to share it. Faker seemed to be barely playing any scrim matches during that time. So Faker wasn't playing scrim, so Closer was supposed to be the next mid laner. But that may have been a bit risky, because we talked about the clutch factor of the veteran players in a best of 5 situation. What happens when you're really nervous and you're one match away from making it to Worlds or not making it? Then having those veteran players who've been to that situation so many times is really helpful. And I can't fully talk about the synergy, but it seems that after T1 lost to Africa at the World Cup match of LCK playoffs, T1 back into the drawing board. They tried different combinations of players, and it seems like Kana, Elim, Faker, Gumayushi, Effort was the best option that they could find that was giving them the best scrim results. I'm like, okay, this is fine, but could this experiment have been done a little earlier? What's a point of including Closer completely and excluding Faker completely when you're not willing to experiment? When you actually decide to experiment later in the split, it actually turns out that having Faker and Elim is a better option for the team. So it felt a bit lacking in foresight, perhaps. Maybe that's a very strong word. I actually want to hear from Nudge. So, what do you think about this from a coaching perspective?
This is where coaching becomes very handy, because League of Legends is a very specific world. Esports is a very different world from a lot of stuff, because you have 5 to 9 scrim games a day, which means if you're doing multiple combination, which I'll be honest, I had a split where I had very talented player in many positions. I was forced my hands into some situation, but it becomes very, very hard to find your perfect combination of player. But the biggest problem with this is, as you pointed out, if you cannot play enough games with an entire lineup, for me, you're going to be lackluster in terms of execution. And then this was T1 in playoff. I think they had leads in every single game in those playoffs. In the Gauntlet, T1 wasn't the lead at some point. And then, bam, the game just exploded. And then it comes down to a lot of composure, a lot of experience. And as well as Gumayushi could play his laning phase, there were mistakes that you would not have seen Teddy do into a much closer situation. And I'm not saying it's the right or wrong thing, because from the outside, we can never know. You can never know as a coach. That's why I say I don't want to speculate. I don't have their scrim results. But I know that scrim and stage is 2 different worlds. And if you have mechanical players, like the lineup that for me they were running was very good mechanically, you're going to have success in scrim. Definitely. But would you rather have that success in scrim, or the team that won first split, the team that went 13-5 and on a bad day ended up dropping 2 games to Africa Freaks? Or with your world's life on the line, or the other lineup? They chose the other lineup. I'm never going to advance anything on that. I don't blame the Faker pick. I still believe that the Closer lineup was beautiful to watch. They were creating windows that almost no one in Korea had ever created. But then to prepare to this talk, I watched the entire Locker Room series from...
What did you get from it?
from T1.
It's kind of crazy, by the way, just as a quick aside, to even get that level of insight from Korea. Like, famously, if people don't know, in the early days when we used to have the open circuit and Korean teams like Frost and Blaze would come over to Europe or America, they were infamous for not allowing any information whatsoever. Like, they didn't even want comms recorded. They were trying to, like, hoard all information and keep it. Like, the idea they do a series like that where you can pick up little details is crazy to me. So it's pretty cool, right?
It is, and one of the main detail I picked up is in their first split in the final, like one of the things they all talked about, it was Faker's experience, composure, and how when the game was going bad under high pressure, he managed to keep the entire team calm. And when you go to playoff and you go through those pressure moments, it's what it means. And it felt like the Faker Kana, like I loved seeing Kana closer together because I think it reached another mechanical dimension. But you can see that in this show, the relationship between Faker and Kana is one where Kana, who got attacked a lot by teams, is an amazing player. But teams, if they wanted to beat SKT, they were attacking this guy. He would actually find windows to die. And whether we want it or not, for me, he was one of the main reason why they lost, not because of him, but because of how team found ways to attack him. And he couldn't find his composure, which is one of the big part that Kana was talking about, how Faker is like the person who can keep him calm, can keep him laughing, can keep him focused. And in playoff, that's what you want. So when we watch the show, like they don't go in depth about like strategy, but you can see the way relationships between people are to some extent. And I think it was very interesting because I'm on the outside and I'm like, I was hoping that the show would have the Africa Freaks preparation and then the Gen.G Gauntlet preparation, which it didn't. Maybe it will come out at some point. Because my goal through this was like to tell myself, how did that happen to T1? How can a team that have so much experience, so much talent, such a solid infrastructure and a culture of winning could crumble in some of the most important series? And I forgot what could have happened, but
mate, it's not even like Freaks was that good. They were the team who just couldn't get a win off any good teams. So like, yeah, I agree. Like that was very shocking.
So it was like I was watching this and I was like, where did it go wrong? But I just can't tell. Like, why would they move Teddy out? I don't know. Like, why would they stop with the closer after one breakdown? This is coaching decision. And that's why when we come back to the question Ashley asked me, it's like, you can, let's say, bring a point on a coaching decision, but there are a million factors that we will never know. And when you go into a draft, like, sure, I think from a coaching point of view, this spike pick was awful by DRX into the game one. But what if they would just went 12-0 and this just had a very bot side oriented focused game plan versus this Kate lane, and then the spike ended up being insane because they could just kill and play into their face, which is a reliable strategy when you're going to scrims. Because, for example, if I had probably the best bot lane in Brazil in the split, and whenever people were picking Kate lane, we would just pick Trash Kalista, pick a strong jungler towards bot side, and tell people, you want to pick Kate lane? We're going to kill you 10 times. And that's literally what happened. So I think they sort of wanted to do strategy like this when you're going Pike, but then the entire jungle padding didn't go in that direction. So it made it very interesting. And then that's about coaching. It's like you can never truly predict the extent. You can never truly understand a decision a team make. You can only speculate, which, like I said, is one of the things I don't really like doing, because if all you do is speculate without having all the information, like maybe did he had a broken finger? We would know if he did, but like maybe he was having a professional burnout. Like you can say whatever you want, and then because of that, you just want this situation you want to give your team the best chance to win. And as a coach, you make the decision, which on the day you judge will give your team the best chance to win. And that's where they went with this lineup. They failed against the Africa Freaks. I think they may have pressed the red button for Panic a little bit too fast after that series. But then they tried something else. They had success. They went with it. They lost. And that is sports. That is esports. That is just how life goes in a lot of facets.
Sure. I mean, that was the other thing as well. Like, I'll give you another angle on it. Again, obviously, pure speculation here. Because I'm totally with you on both the Faker and Gumayushi angle, which is that, like, even if the guy is mechanically better, and maybe in scrims he's smurfing on the other team, the problem is you never know what he's going to do under pressure in a chaotic playoff game. So that's where you always look at the veteran and say, well, like for example, Teddy's been in Jin Air where it was like nightmare mode for AD carries. Like, this guy knows what to do even when he's in a game that's behind. So I agree. I like the fact that you would gamble your world's life on that. That suggests to me something like either, like you're saying, there's something going on behind the scenes, or another one, which is a depressing thought, is, for example, when they were playing Gen.G, maybe they just really thought our players aren't good enough to win the series. So we have to gamble. We have to put in this X factor that the other team won't have prepared for.
Yeah, sometimes it comes down to this. Like, to prepare for our last weekend of the season, I had B-Void play mid a few games because I was like, I think I might need this Lucian in mid to open pressure just because of how good the other team mid laner was. And like I said, DRX, they beat Gen.G after that super long pause that happened in the semifinal by purely destroying them mechanically. And I think T1 tried to have a composition where that would happen. And when you watch T1 in that series, they were a fantastic team into the sequence where they had a good setup because their mechanics would never fail them. So the Elise game, Elim started 3-0-2, but they were doing the right play and they were executing it so well that they were getting more than they should actually get out of that situation. But then you have the other situation where Gumayashi contests the wrong lane into mid lane and dies. Contests the wrong lane into bot lane and dies. And then you have the other situation where you didn't have the coordination of the bunch. And then Faker makes an unbelievable outplay in bot lane. They ends up getting an ace. They start Baron. ETPs instantly dies because there was zero coordination between how they were planning to turn or burn onto the Baron. And then they just get aced and they lost the game. And I was like, damn. Like, you went from hero to zero as a team within a matter of 1 minute. Simply because a lot of this comes down sometimes to experience, sometimes to mechanics, but a lot of this comes down to synergy, which Ashley pointed out. Like, when you go deep into the season, the teams that can read each other's mind, in a sense, that can be on the same page will win. And for me, DAMWON Gaming is they are the most balanced team in terms of what they are going to do inside Korea. And you could see how well they were playing the sequences of events inside a game, almost always being on the same page.
Like, this is completely off the tangent, but you know how after every off-season, if you're not a team that completely won the finals, everyone's like, oh, swap this player out, swap that player out. Like, you know, hey, like, this player just became free agent. Oh, like, you know, like, this team will be much better with a better support or jungler or whatever. But I think a lot of people overlook the power of teamwork in League of Legends, because in the end, League of Legends is a team game. And of course, you know, you have headphones and mics and you're communicating with each other, but so much comes down to the split-second decision where maybe you don't even have time to communicate. Maybe the two players just have to initiate at the same time. Like, that level of coordination to a point that it's coming out of like muscle memory, not out of, like, you know, just like verbal communication. That's so important. And when G2 re-signed their players until, like, was it like 2022, and everyone was like, hey, Yanko's is getting too old. Oh, like, you know, they're failing in the summer split at the moment. They didn't leave their options open. But I just see that G2 is recognizing the power of having that, like, you know, like insane teamwork, which DAMWON Gaming is also starting to show, given that this roster has been around for 2 years and a bit. And sometimes this could backfire. I've seen some teams where they say, okay, we stayed in this current roster for too many times and the player A and B simply couldn't reconcile their differences. Now they hate each other. So in that case, it might make sense to switch out a player. But when you don't necessarily have that and players are genuinely getting along with each other and can play as a hive mind, so to speak, in a game, then I think having had a same roster for more than a year can be a huge advantage, especially in an intense situation such as the best of 5 at Worlds.
What about, since we've barely mentioned them so far, let's talk about Gen.G. So obviously Gen.G was the team where, like, basically, as I alluded to at the beginning of the show, really this split was going to be between DRX and obviously DAMWON. Like, you could just see it throughout the whole nature. And the big problem I had with Gen.G is they're in what I actually think is the worst position you can be in. Because even though they had a very good chance to go to Worlds, the worst position to be in is where you're good enough to beat everyone else in the whole league, but the teams that are slightly better than you are the teams that are above you. So you've got the hard ceiling you're going to bump into. I even saw this with the guy who won the MVP of the split, BDD. So if you hear that he wins the MVP, you're going to think, well, he must be the best mid laner. Not even close. I mean, most people don't even think he's top 2. And so one of the interesting factors I noticed is that seemed to tie into this characterization of how the team worked, because pretty much every bad game for BDD where he couldn't get going was a game they lost. Like, they lived and died through mid jungle, as far as I can tell. So what do you think, Ashley? Where do you come down on Gen.G after this split, and what's your sense for how strong they are as a team?
I wouldn't just look at the scoreline of DRX versus Gen.G. Oh, DRX won their 3-2. Gen.G must be a worse team. I wouldn't make that a summary. Like, if you give me that series again 10 times, 8 times Gen.G would win it. Like, I love DRX, but just in that their current form on the day, Gen.G was a better team. Gen.G had the better bot lane. Gen.G's, like, BDD was going even. I think Chobi had a bit more, like, playmaking factor. Rascal is a super consistent player. They can play both tanks and carries. They had better coordination. It's not a secret that the Gen.G players, even before this roster formed, are really, really good friends with each other. Rascal, BDD, Clid. I think Gen.G is a good team. I think Gen.G is a solid team. Like,
sorry.
No, go for it.
Like, for me, Gen.G is a team that knows how to win. They have very similar play style, and what's crazy about them is the explosion that they bring is different from the other from DAMWON Gaming, for example. Like, if you look at them, they will roll you over, or they will get rolled over. But they start rolling over from the Jarvan game. They play Jarvan Galio. And then if they're playing Jarvan Galio, Chovy, what are they going to do to you? They're going to level 2 gank you. What did they do? Level 2 gank into a 4-man TP bot lane games 4-0 at 3 minutes. That was the Gen.G that over spring just dominated everyone. At least for me. And then lost in the final. Sure. But that is also the Gen.G that wins their game. Like, they know how to get rolling as a team together. But I do think that sometimes they just lose control of the game. And then BDD versus Chovy, this series was very close as a whole. And then this entire pause that happened, I think it was a 3-hour pause, right, during that day. And then they ended up playing on the live server. And then you could see that it's like BDD had lost his rhythm in the matches a bit. And I don't know how Gen.G is, like, as a team, as a whole, like their entire organization. But for me, they're a very momentum-based team, not just inside the game, but apparently inside the series. Because the moment you broke their focus, you broke, let's say, their flow that was going inside the game, they became a much worse version of what they are. But I think on that day, they should have beaten DRX. They were making plays everywhere to give themselves a chance to win. But then DRX could still find ways, and then game 4 and 5, they completely dominated them through me. Like, Chovy played an insane echo game, and then they had some very solid drafting, and they ran away with the series. Like, for me, it was a robbery, that semifinal.
Is that also what you were kind of alluding to, Ashley? Because obviously, I mean, it's a bit like actually what happened in the finals of LCS, where they also had like a pause where, like, Wild Turtle had to go to a different PC, etc. The problem with those moments is that it's not like a 1-minute pause or like, they just had a tech problem. It's such a massive change. Like, in that case, it was hours and hours and people just waiting. No one can ever wind that clock back and find out what would have happened again. It will change something. We have to speculate what it is, right?
Like, it's like weird. Like, I didn't even consider the FlyQuest TSM thing to be an issue but then I went on Reddit and everyone's like, oh my God, there should have been a Chrono Break, there should have been a remake. And I'm like, okay. Because, like, number one, I believe that TSM was actually winning the particular game. They were in a very favorite spot. Number two, it wasn't like a huge pause. Like, it was for like a 1 hour. To give a bit more context on the pause that happened in the DRX versus Gen.G series. The technical issue happened right after they finished their third game, and the entire tournament realm blew up. And the pause extended for 3 hours, and the players went out for dinner and everything because like there was nothing else they could do. And they still couldn't get the tournament realm back up working. It wasn't right. It was like the external internet provider that completely blew up across the entire Asia. So they actually played game 4 and 5 at the live server, which slightly changed the drafting priorities around. So I think for that series, the pause had a huge impact on DRX. Like 3 hours is a very long time, and Thorin even said that he had a bit of a nap between game 3 and 4, and it was enough for the losing team to reset their mentals and review their pick and ban priority and come back to the game strong. But meanwhile, the FlyQuest versus TSM one it happened in the game, so players couldn't necessarily talk about the strategy with one another. You're not allowed to when you are within a game, within a game pause, and it was only for like an hour long. So I wouldn't. Yeah, that's
Do they
my
have anyone
conclusion.
who can check that though, since they're online?
That's true.
Because I don't know if they have an admin behind that. I know you're right. If it's LCS, yeah, obviously if it's a tech pause, you're supposed to stay totally silent. That's why they can't even talk to each other. But for that one, I'm not sure actually if there's anyone in the room for that. Like that might have been sort of relaxed. I'm not sure.
True.
I agree with you though. Put it this way, I'll even add another factor in. Even just the fact that you said that they went out and ate dinner during the pause, that in itself could be a massive game changer, because this is just a piece of trivia, but one of the very famous Western esports champions of the early days of esports was a Quake player called Fatality. He's a pretty famous name. And one of his actual innovations that no one else did at the time is he would only eat his meals at like specific set times, and he would actually try to make all his competition periods so he'd never consume food during, like, between matches, because he never wanted anything to change like the variables at play. You know, he wanted to know that like however I start, it's going to be the same for the whole matches. So you never know what these things could throw you off. So much could happen in 3 hours.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, and momentum is so important in a series. If you feel like if you're down 2-1, and if you also feel like you lost the last 2 games in a very helpless fashion, it can be more demoralizing. It can impact your performance. But
Sure.
DRX was given the time to recover their mentals, which was not up to them. It was just a natural disaster that no one could predict. But it just happened that this particular situation that happened was more favorable for DRX's situation.
I have a question. They played on live. Did it change the patch?
They changed the patch.
Yeah, they changed the patch. It was.
What patch did it go to?
God.
It was from 10.16 to 10.17. So to give you even more context, so the tournament server blew up. They waited for it to come up, and then they couldn't get it working. So the Gen.G and DRX started negotiating. What can we do? Because both teams have to agree on a solution before you can move forward, right?
Right.
That's like the optimal situation. And I believe it was actually Gen.G who suggested first, hey, why don't we just play this on a live server? And DRX looked into it and agreed with it.
That is interesting, because that doesn't just change the momentum of a series. That changes the meta you're going to play. That changes picks. That changes a lot of stuff.
Like, the good thing is the patch between 16 and 17 wasn't huge. Mm-hmm. The only thing was it made Hecarim slightly weaker, but Gen.G decided to play Hecarim anyway. So, yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't a huge change. But in the end, both teams agreed to it. So, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
What about thoughts on Gen.G possibly at Worlds? Because this is one of the ones I have the hardest time trying to predict how good they will be.
I think they can do fine. I think, like, if you consider last year, all the Koreans team topped their group off, right?
Yes.
So I think they have all the tools, and I think something that's important to mention, Galio got a small buffs. So this will be good for them. Vayne got a buff, which will make the game interesting, because if Galio gets buffed and Vayne gets buffed, who's going to play Vayne into Galio mid? And I think they have all the tools to get out. I think they have fantastic player, and I think their style does clash well with China because they like fighting. And they pick comps that are pretty good at fighting. And I think on a good day, Gen.G can beat anyone. I think the only team that they have a hard time against in Korea is DAMWON. Because I think DAMWON's control and the way they control the vision is very meticulous. And because of that, Gen.G just couldn't get the window that they abuse versus a lot of people. But I think Klid is a fantastic jungler who always finds a way to give leads to his team. And BDD, if given a small lead, is very good at transferring what he acquired to side lanes. And this type of play style usually does very well in any competition.
I did see that for World's patch, Azir got nerfed, which is
true.
Very unfortunate.
It's a bit, yeah.
Yeah. Which is really unfortunate for BDD, who I believe is the best Azir player, actually, going into Worlds. Like, maybe Knight has better Syndra, but BDD is the man when it comes to Azir.
That's
so it's really
fair.
I think that's really unfortunate for Gen.G. Like, I think Gen.G would actually have a very strong matchup against LPL teams. I think Gen.G is a bit underrated going into Worlds because they lost to DRX and everything. But again, I think that match could have played in many different ways. But I'll be actually looking out for Gen.G versus some of the more LPL playstyles, like such as G2. I'm a bit worried about that. Like, I can't put a finger at it, but yeah, I'm a bit worried about Gen.G like beating top LPL teams, then suddenly dropping a game against like Mad Lions. I hope it doesn't happen, but yeah. Oh my god, I just had a bias. Mad Lions gonna hate me now. I'm sorry.
It's alright.
Subconscious.
I think
bias.
by the end of the split, Gen.G looked much better than Mad Lions. I mean, Mad Lions limped into Worlds. They only beat Schalke, that was it.
That was pretty much it, yeah. Well, they beat the Miracle Run. Gotta give it to them. But
yeah. Oh no.
Narratives. Love them.
Narratives. Love them.
What about, another question I had was, like I said there, the reason BDD won the MVP, he's actually now won it a bunch of times doing exactly the same thing, is just because of the way that the system works, where it's about how many like individual game MVPs you get essentially. Whereas in other regions, we just do it on opinion. You know, you get a panel of people. You hope it's people who are competent. I will say LCS and LEC allow just like some random journalists I've never heard of to do it. So I'm not really sure they have that method down themselves. But in theory, you're trying to just get consensus opinion. So Nuddle, who would your MVP of LCK Summer have been? Would you have gone with BDD? Would you have a different pick? I know obviously like Reddit is kind of in love with Showmaker maybe being the MVP. What do you think?
Well, just to talk about the system, like it's very straightforward. If a team is on top of the ranking, already helps. And then if the player is the enabler to his team, which for me, Klid can enable BDD, and then BDD just enables everything. And then on the given day of the game, well, he's the one who enabled his team to win, so he gets the MVP. So you can talk about MVP in many ways, and that's why like you look historically at sports, there's like in hockey, I'm Canadian, so obviously I played hockey.
Sure.
You have like the MVP, who is the most valuable player for his team into the league. And then you have like in the AHL, you have that vote where the player decides. There's a vote for the best player in the league.
Yes.
And like literally comes down to who was the best player. It doesn't have to be for his team, just means as a whole. Sure,
I think that's
BDD
even the reason they
fit.
invented it, by the way, is so that in theory, if you weren't on the best team, but you were like Wayne Gretzky, they still give you it, you know. Yeah.
Exactly. So BDD for his team is a very important piece. But then you look at DAMWON Gaming, there's almost no way a player can win the MVP. I would have to check again the MVP points, but how can Showmaker win MVP when in X percentage of the game?
I've got an obvious answer for you there, Nuddle. This is the problem. In all BDD teams, like you say, once he gets going, it's about him. So if they win, he gets the MVP. The problem is, if you're in DAMWON Gaming, right, well, now Naguri's going to steal a few MVPs from you. Maybe Beryl gets one if he does some weird pick that game. Canyon pops off on the jug. So the problem they have is they sort of share the game votes, don't they?
I mean, pretty much. And that's why, like, when you look at the system like this versus EU, well, you're just giving it the caps.
Yes.
Like, sure, he was the most valuable player for his team, but like he would have maybe in the end of the split, the Jankos may have had more MVP vote singular because he's the one who enables cap on that given it, but the best player is Caps. And then if you look at DAMWON Gaming, you can have this, but I do think that it's hard to really name an MVP in that team because for me, they play as a team and they all have tools to carry. They find windows and everyone accepts their role. And this is how you create winning championship team. Like there's always going to be the person who's going to do the dirty job. And then for that team, it's their bot lane. And I like comparing them like to, I think it was Longzhu in 2017. When they had that canned peanut gorilla parade type with BDD once again in that lineup, if I remember correctly. And you knew how they were going to play. But you just had Pro and Gorilla in bot lane who just accepted that they would be playing a losing side, but that they trusted their top side of the map to win. But that team couldn't evolve from this. So they made it to World and lost into the semifinal. And this is where, if you compare that team to DAMWON Gaming this year, DAMWON showed their adaptability and showed that they have the talent to actually build on this. And this is where their hope for World can go. Because you're not going to be Showmaker, Nuguri, and a bot lane. It's going to be, you're going to give us this draft. We're going to be able to win with this. You're going to give us this. We're going to be able to win with this. And that's why BDD might be the MVP for his team. Showmaker's way better player. And BDD, you can put him top 4, maybe in LCK, I think.
Like,
mechanically closer, really better. So
you guys realize that Korea has a new MVP system, right?
No, what happened?
Yeah. Like, so they give you the POG points and they kind of also recognize the person who has the most amount of POG points, but they vote for a separate MVP.
Ah, right. Okay.
FYI, yeah. So
did that change for this split, or was it? It previously?
I think it was also the case for last split, but last split BDD also won it anyway. BDD also won the MVP anyway, but because he was really great, right? And DAMWON Gaming was only surging up into their dominance.
Yes. I mean, he was the best team at the time.
Yeah. So at the time, this was BDD, but they do it the same way as the LEC and LCS now. So they vote the best AD carry, the best top laner. So they have like an all-star team.
Oh, they're all-star team. Yes.
Yeah, as well as the individual player. And
the
for this
team, yeah.
Yeah. So for the summer split, the MVP was the Showmaker. Showmaker got the most amount of MVP votes, and Kenyan was the second. Meanwhile, the all-star team was top Nuguri, DAMWON Gaming, jungle, Kenyan DAMWON Gaming, mid Showmaker DAMWON Gaming, AD carry ruler of Gen.G, and support Beryl.
Ah, right. Yes, I just looked at that number of points and I thought it was the same system. What about, who would your MVP have been, Ashley? Would you have picked someone different than Showmaker then if he's the one who won?
No, not at all. I mentioned on other podcasts, you're crazy if you don't vote for Showmaker on this vote. You're absolutely crazy. And it's like all the DAMWON players perform super well, so they deserve to be an all-star. I think some people threw around questions on why Carrier didn't get the best support of the split over Beryl, but they haven't watched the second half of summer split where Beryl was doing so much while Carrier, unlike his spring split form, looked shaky at times. So I do agree with the vote.
Yeah, that was actually a problem I noticed generally when I was reading Reddit threads about LCK, is because there's just so many matches contrasted to LEC and LCS, you can tell the people who sort of picked up on what was like a good storyline early in the split and then just sort of kept running with it, even though there'd been tons of best of threes that showed otherwise. Like, for example, I know by the end of the split, there were some people really shocked that they subbed out Teddy, but it's like, the Teddy that looked really good at some of the early games in the split, he didn't make it to the end of the split. He definitely had some times where he looked like a little bit weaker. So I noticed that trend as well. The thing I have is, again, I like the way Nuddle did it there, where he kind of tried to define how you rank the MVP. So if you're doing it by, you're taking the word valuable to mean like he's the one who had the most to do with his team winning, and his team was the best, therefore that makes them the most valuable. If you go with that angle, I don't mind BDD, I don't mind Showmaker. I think they're both reasonable calls. If you want to go with just the old school version, which is kind of like what you're alluding to with the players vote when they have in NHL, and they also have it in the NFL as well for the same reason, so that you don't have to have the best record for your team. If you go with the old one, which basically just means who is the best individual player, forget who's on their team, forget if they've got a bad GM, forget everything. Did they just play? I wouldn't hate it for either Showmaker or Chovy for that one. I did think Chovy was still extremely good. It's just, I think Showmaker has a team that fits around him better slightly, and some slightly better teammates in some positions. But I actually think it's cool that it was such a good kind of competition for that. There wasn't just an obvious person who had to win only. Like, I agree stats-wise, and the fact that DAMWON was number one meant, yeah, it was almost certainly going to be Showmaker, but that's quite interesting, I thought. Do we have any final topic before we wrap this one up? Ashley, is there anything we didn't talk about you wanted to cover?
Is it going to be an Eastern Finals? What do you think?
Is it going to be like LPL versus LCK?
Or LPL versus LPL? Yeah. I'll
give my thought on that one.
Yeah.
Here's the real problem, is even though I know there's different reasons why people will get hyped about some of the other teams, the only team that I think can stop it is G2. And part of the reason why is I don't even think that they were in that insane form. Like, they only really looked insane in the final against Fnatic, and even then they were doing some very weird stuff in the draft, and they were still doing. Actually, throughout the whole playoffs, they continued to do that thing where they could have crushed some teams insanely hard, and then they would just give the team the game back and sort of almost toy with their food like a cat, as it were, with a mouse. So that's scary to me, because I don't want them to do that against DAMWON Gaming or something like that. That'll be a bad state of affairs for them. So I feel like G2, the coolest thing about them is they have some sort of insane mindset that I've never seen since, if we go all the way back to the old Gambit gaming in Moscow 5. They have some insane ability to come back into games and to never give up. So I think that means they've got a chance. But I personally think, put it this way, if I had to bet, I would just pick the final would be Top Esports versus DAMWON. I think those are the two teams that had the least slip-ups, generally look consistently the best, have very good players in all positions pretty much. I'm not really a big fan of the support of TES, but then again, I also think the bot lane of DAMWON might not be as good internationally. So I think there's a very good chance that it's LCK versus LPL in the final.
Speaking of G2, agreeing with Thorin on that, I've never seen a mindset like that is shared commonly across the team. This is going back to 2019, Griffin versus G2, when G2 lost to Griffin back-to-back and lost their second seed. And Perks actually said to me right after the loss, and I really appreciate whenever a player does a loser interview for me because I know how tough it is. He said that he's glad that he's lost so early because he noticed obvious mistakes that led to the loss. And he now knows how to fix them. And I sense so much maturity in that answer. And I interviewed G2 players throughout their slump, throughout their resurgence, after their finals, which they kind of admitted it was just a bit clumpy, so a lot of mistakes here and there. But they admit that. They admit, hey, we don't think our performance is good. Hey, when we go to Worlds, we probably start our scrims again, get crushed by LCK and LPL, but they still tell me they're confident. We can fix our mistakes. We can stay one as a team. We can ramp up from here. We can absorb other team strengths. And that kind of confidence that brought them from losing to Team Vitality to winning LEC once again is a level that I have not necessarily seen in any other team.
What I think is interesting of G2 is my only question mark is their bot lane, because I know Perks, probably for me, is one of the hardest, from what you can see on the outside, hardest worker, one of the smartest player probably in League of Legends history, because no one can just go from role to role, in terms of ADC and mid, and actually be able to play at such a high level. But he's not going to be facing a Nilisang. He's not going to be facing a Vander. He's going to be facing those J.K. Love bot lane. And I think this brings a big worry, considering that their bot lane slipped a lot. And considering some of the mistake they did, in the best of 5 versus Fnatic that went into 5 games, when they made that push into bot lane, it cost them a 3-1 series. They would have 3-1 that semifinal if it wasn't for that play. But those slip-ups can cost you a lot. But like you guys said, like G2 has like this aura, and they always find a way to just get out of their slump. But that's why I like watching Yanko so much, his stream, because he's super honest. When they're losing, he just says, "Oh, we're fucking bad right now. Like we suck." He literally clears it, and then he directly points out what are some of their weaknesses. He directly points out what other teams do best. But by doing so, they have something that's like unique in a sense, how they face their problem. Sure, I'm not on the inside, speculation once again.
Yeah.
But they're a team who has issues, identifies them, and solves them. And this is not something that everyone can actually actively say that is something that they do. And this is one of their biggest strengths. And that's why sometimes they start weaker and then they'll win. But I think a lot of it is going to come down to who they're going to draw in terms of quarterfinal, semifinal, grand final. And I think a lot of this is going to be the same for every team, because you can already say that there's like 4 or 5 teams that can be world contender, but only one team will win, and only 2 of them will be in the final.
Sure.
So there's a world into which you have Kuyallup Esports versus DAMWON Gaming semifinal, and you're like, well,
yeah, certainly.
Too bad. And then you just have like G2 on the other side rocking through. Like C9 made some semifinal finish. Like there was Forgiven Steam in season 7 or something that had a perfect group and just went skyrocket straight through and finished 3rd at Worlds. Congratulations. But then you think of historically G2, which is what is one of the most interesting stats. The year they won MSI, they didn't beat a single Chinese team. They lost to World, they got 0-3 by Chinese team. The next thing, they get 0-3 by Chinese team. They always lose to Chinese team, but I think their style is close to Chinese team. But
that's why something you said earlier, because if people were wondering where you said that, you weren't just memeing the final where you said, like, if they could in the quarterfinals get a Chinese team and they get 3-0. That was the most bizarre thing if you think about the psychological component. On the one hand, all the Korean teams are thinking, like, well, G2 is the team that kills all the Koreans. That's a scary matchup. The Chinese teams, in theory, should think that's the one we want.
That's what they want. Like they just want G2 to kill Korea, just like
do them a favor.
The Flash Wolf used to do. They just Flash Wolf kill Korea, and then that's it.
You know, Flash Wolves would beat SKT, and then RNG or someone would go, "Yeah, thanks very much. I'll take."
Oh my god, that just reminded me. Karsa is in Top Esports right now. That's giving me a lot of PSTD. Karsa is known as the Korean killer in Korea.
He deserves the title. It's crazy.
Yeah.
People don't realize how many best of ones those guys won. They might have won like 7 best of ones against SKT in Korea. It was crazy. Yeah.
Like, I'm kind of sad, but also happy that, what do you call it? G2, DAMWON Gaming, and Top Esports won't be facing each other at groups.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm kind of sad because I really wanted to see those matchups, but it also gets me excited because as long as there aren't any upsets, we'll see them sooner or later in a best of 5.
Yes. The only thing is, though, those are the famous last words, as long as there aren't.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
And that's the crazy thing.
I need my G2 versus DAMWON Gaming. I need it to go to Game 5. That's my only wish. That needs to go to Game 5.
But then look at that. Like, I remember when I was watching Europe, the difference between winning and losing the European Grand Final literally meant that you can't be in the same group as TES.
Yes.
Which is literally the reality of the groups this year. It is going to be very chaotic for some team, because I'm pretty sure G2 can have the second seed China in their group, I think. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there's a
yes, because China actually has 2.
This will happen.
China has 2 second seeds.
Yes, exactly. So there's 50% chance that they have a Chinese group, second Chinese team, which is JDG or Sunning Gaming, and that's not going to be one right away. So there's going to be a lot of group of deaths this year, but the second position Europe is stuck with, I'm pretty sure it can be with first seed China and third seed third seed Korea. It could all be in the same group with a European team, and it's going to make an amazing clash.
Sure.
And that's why I like Worlds. Like, we're going to have the best teams are going to go through. That's all we can say. Sure, sometimes it comes down to a given day, but the best teams are going to advance, and there's not going to be like an easy group unless you're in the NA first seed group. Not to bad talk NA, because I think TSM made progress, but it's like you look at FlyQuest, like they play fine, but I think they just play fine for NA, and I think they're like a worse version of Mad Lions and Rogue.
Yeah.
And then Mad Lions barely made playoffs.
That style doesn't look very good for these patches,
so it's going to be interesting, exactly. So let's see how they can do, because the carry jungler meta is there. They're going to be facing Nidalee. They're going to be facing mids who are pretty much as good or better at them in every team. Like every team in like mid role is stacked as always, and it's going to be a nice run.
Yeah.
This is LS, and you're on Thorin's YouTube channel, so cut the Western shit.
This video was kindly supported by Dean Tanglis, Spencer Green, Whattathings, Pranogo, Matt Shakowski, Tobias Bernasconi, JDubs, Alexander Rao, Xinged, the Puyallup Tribe, Jensen Goh, Hades, Andreas Kroknes, and as always, a special thanks goes out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? Maybe you want to ask me a question in one of those video AMAs I do. Do you want teasers? Do you want to see who the next guests are on my shows? Do you want to take part in an in-depth esports discussion with moi? Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and join the Scrilluminati today in the Patreon link in the description box below.